from COVID-19, and what can the city do to support that? You know, we are a level of government, the closest level of government to the people. The provincial government and the federal governments have a role to play in all of this recovery. Excuse me, I forgot to turn my phone off. So tonight we're going to talk about the municipal role. This is a bit different for us, you know, to get involved in some of these new projects, and we're doing so that we can, as a community, recover. And to me, recover is economically, socially, culturally. It's not just an economic recovery in the short term. We're trying to bring some ideas forward. The next element here is we're here to listen and to get your feedback and ideas on initiatives that can promote the community and our economic recovery. So we have some ideas we're going to present to you tonight, but we also know that you're going to have some great ideas to share with us as well. And we have a large crowd, and we have a limited amount of time tonight. So, you know, I'd ask you to, when we get into that part of the agenda, to share those ideas, but we're not going to get them all fleshed out in this call tonight, but we'll be able to follow up on those. We're also going to discuss with you Open Streets, our survey we just did, and we want to obtain your feedback from you on this concept of, you know, street closures or opening to pedestrians and using streets differently than we typically use them. So we're going to share that with you as well. Next slide, please. The other thing, sorry, and I don't know if David, I think you mentioned this morning. Throughout this, after this call or through the call, this email address, feedback@stjohn.ca, is another mechanism for you to give your feedback. So if you go away from this call and you're thinking about a great idea that comes to you through the night or tomorrow or the next day, you can send your feedback there. Next slide. When we want to talk about the goals and objectives here, I want to go to the last bullet, and that's that the city has done something that it's never done before, and that is that it's put some rainy day funds in place, some reserve funds in place. And growth is critically important. More people, more growing the tax base, how we grow, how we pay our bills, and attracting investment and jobs. So we have a bit of a reserve fund for growth-oriented initiatives. Now we've had COVID-19 happen. And so we've earmarked not to just spend it, but some dollars available if the criteria can be met. So we want to enable and accelerate local economic and community activity in response to the current public health pandemic. We also want to focus on what can be facilitated or delivered by the city. We want to ensure engagement with the community and community partners. And we've had amazing community partners working over the last 8-10 weeks. Uptown St. John, Discover St. John, Economic Development Greater St. John, Develop St. John, the Chamber, the St. John Regional Chamber, the United Way, the Y, so many partners. We also want to reaffirm St. John's civic pride and community ownership. So we know that, myself included, we've been a little bit shaken by COVID-19. So how do we get ourselves back out and feeling comfortable and get that momentum going again? And we also want to offer different initiatives over time, depending on the level of social distancing required, the state of emergencies, that we have to follow. So that's that slide. And I think there's one more for me, David. Is that correct? Yeah. So, and the last slide for me is, we can't do this alone. We can't do it without civic and citizen engagement. Business owners of all sizes, small, medium, large enterprises, all those economic and other agencies that we talked about, the social agencies. So we can't do it alone. We have to, and we want to, drive volume and customers to those impacted organizations and businesses, the business districts. We want to be innovative. We want to harness that innovation in our program delivery. We want to focus on delivering at least one new initiative every month. And this isn't on the slide, but we've been really pushing our staff to go fast. You know, it's not going to be perfect. We'll make some mistakes, but let's get out and try some things and test some concepts here so that we can make an even better city than we had before. So with that, I'll say thank you and look forward to the dialogue tonight.
All right, thanks, Mayor Darling, for your introductory comments. Next on the docket, we have a colleague of mine, Phil Willett. Phil is our Deputy Commissioner of Growth and Community Planning. Lives in a heritage home in our Central Peninsula as well. And he's the chair of our recovery team in-house at City Hall. So Phil will be speaking tonight about our recovery initiatives that we already have planned to go. And then we're going to be asking your feedback on some potential initiatives. And we want to hear what you have to say about those. And so Phil, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, David, and welcome to everybody on the call, the web, whatever way we want to call it. It's so great to have so many people interested in this issue. You know, we released the survey on open streets, and we thought we were going to get a couple hundred interests. And I'm kind of spoiler alert, but there was over 2,000 responses. So I think we've hit on something as a municipality and as a community that we want to talk about. We want to have a conversation about. And while we are collecting your feedback today, and we will get going on what the next steps are, as Mayor Darling has indicated, we've already started. And I did want to start by sharing what are those initiatives we've already engaged in and we're already implementing, to give you a little bit of a flavor of what we're thinking is ways and mechanisms in which we can drive volume to those commercial districts and support community and economic recovery. So next slide. So the first one is the night market. We had a night market last year, and it was unclear if we were going to have one this year. And we're very pleased to announce that it will be in place again this year, with obviously some changes, and that will be on June 18th, next Thursday. So a little bit of work to do before that comes, but we are very excited for that. And that will be something that will bring in extra customers in our Central Peninsula, and not only for the market, but for hopefully other businesses in the area. So one of the kind of really great stories here is when the pandemic first hit and everybody was kind of dealing with what do we do next, we had already given out about 50 different grants to community groups and arts organizations across the city. And for the majority of them, they were saying, listen, I'll probably defer till next year. And recently we're discovering that almost all of them are pivoting and finding ways to innovate their programming for delivery within the social distancing framework that we're working with, in order to deliver value to the citizens of St. John and visitors of St. John. So I think that's a great story, and there's a lot of innovation that will continue to come from here. And it's a part of that theme that the mayor indicated earlier, that we can't do this alone. The city, a business can't do this alone. The whole community has to participate in our ability to reestablish that sense of community and also support the businesses that are in need. Something we announced this past Monday is a traveling picnic table program, and we will be animating through local artists some picnic tables, which we will place at different locations, different parks, different public spaces and pop-up spaces across the city, in order to bring people to those commercial districts more effectively. This is actually an example of a similar program in Florida. So we're going to be discussing this more in the coming slides, but we also very much know that street closures, what we're calling open streets, is something that we are looking into, and that we believe is likely something that the community wants and supports, and can support businesses if done effectively. I think it is important just to make this note that I think it's very easy for anybody to say, well, listen, I just read an article and Calgary is doing this and St. John is not. Therefore, St. John is not doing great as it relates to recovery. And, you know, you hear that logic sometimes. I heard Fredericton is doing this and St. John is not. So therefore, St. John is behind. I think that might be the wrong way of looking at it. And just the consultation that we've done through the survey and through these virtual town halls so far, it's what works for St. John. If street closures work, and we have a feeling that it does, well, let's go with it. If it doesn't, it's okay. We can move on to something else and we can find other mechanisms. But we need to hear from those people who will be both the users as well as the facilitators of how we animate our communities to entice that kind of respectful social distancing volume of people in our commercial nodes. We did announce as well on Monday a new pop-up park. I was there this morning. There's a little bit of work to do to make it, I would say, park friendly, but it is a small rectangular grassed area beside the circular Loyalist Plaza in the Central Peninsula. It's currently fenced off, but the plan is to remove that to animate the space a little bit more and to invite more people to again grab their meals, grab their coffees, grab the shoes or the shirt they wanted to buy from that uptown business, and then go enjoy it in this park amongst others. So that's the vision that we have for this pop-up park. More to come on that. We have restored our urban development incentive program, as well as the beautification grant, as well as the heritage grant. Great opportunity. You know, one of the things we work, David and I work in the growth and community development services department. One thing that we're clear is when people are home for a long time, they start dreaming up their next projects. And we are seeing a lot of activity on the permit side where people are kind of pursuing those projects that they may have not have proceeded with this year due to just more time around the yard, more time in the house, seeing what really needs to get done. So these programs will be needed for that exterior work to beautify our Central Peninsula. So they're both focused on those areas. We are also going to invite a new streamlined process for community groups and businesses and citizens, those who are on this line, who have ideas about street closures, who want to do something, wants to animate a community area. And I think this is really important to say. We can close down a street, but if nothing happens on it, it's a closed down street that's empty. It doesn't necessarily draw a bunch of people. I think when you close down a street, you think of the Moonlight Bazaar and you think of 3,000 people and you think, yeah, that's how you close down a street. But just closing down the street is not the only thing that has to happen with a couple chairs. There's a little bit more to it. So we think that programming is going to come from citizens, from organizations, and we need to, as a municipality, find a way to streamline that approval process, make it easy, make it user-friendly, so that people can have an idea, come to the city, we can navigate the approvals, get the approvals, and then implement that great program to animate those streets. We're finalizing, and I talked to my colleague who's facilitating this shipping container beer garden. There was a request for proposals, and the bids are currently being reviewed. And this is supposed to be launched in the coming weeks, and it will be very exciting. It is intended to be in the Loyalist Plaza area, so very close to that pop-up park that I mentioned earlier. It won't look exactly like this, but the plan is to get it operating very soon. Lastly, we did access some funding from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to support vulnerable populations here in St. John, and that money will be going towards mental health support for some of those most vulnerable populations impacted by COVID-19 here in St. John. So that is the list that we're already working on, as indicated by the mayor. We wanted to shoot for one a month, and now we're kind of juggling 9, and we have 8 more. And this is important because we will be asking a question about these 8, and I will go through these very quickly. But these 8 are kind of the next round. What's next? And we really like to know your feedback on these. So as I go through them quick, there will be an opportunity here to vote, and David will set that up here very shortly. So here are the potential initiatives. The first is a new grant program. So as I indicated, you close down a street. That doesn't necessarily mean people go to that street. You put a picnic table in a park. That doesn't necessarily mean that people go to that picnic table. You need sometimes a little bit more, and we think the community can do that. So one of the ideas is that we would take some of that growth reserve funding that was mentioned by the mayor earlier, and we create a new grant program to groups, probably smaller scale, $5,000 to $10,000 a piece, to kind of animate in small scale different events throughout the summer and into the fall, so that we can bring people to those commercial districts. Neighborhood yard sale days. I believe Quispamsis had something like this in the past, and we could basically roll something out similar to that to our different neighborhoods and facilitate, the mapping, which ones are going where, who's participating, and map that. And it could be a kind of a fun time for all to go to see different neighborhoods within the city, but also maybe pick up some stuff that other people are ready to part with. Pop-up drive-in theater. A lot of people are talking about this around the city, around using maybe a larger parking lot with maybe a large surface that beside it to invite our own kind of urban St. John, made in St. John drive-in theater. So an idea we're still working with, not finalized yet. Movies or music in municipal facilities or parks. You could kind of imagine that we have a bunch of municipal owned facilities that we could animate. We could bring people into that, again, while respecting social distancing. We could also show movies at different locations. A tailored development incentive program. So as we kind of learn more about what are the needs of residents and what development activity they want to take on in this new era of COVID-19, maybe we need to adapt our existing development incentive programs to facilitate that type of development in our community. We also want to leverage federal and provincial stimulus funding, which is being rolled out, will continue to be rolled out, to unlock those 3 big catalytic growth projects that we have here in St. John. Those include the new school in the Central Peninsula. They're all contemplated, and none of it is 100% yet, but very close in terms of the future of these developments. The other one is Fundy Key, which is basically behind that Loyalist Plaza. And then also the interchange project on the east side that has been contemplated. We also have a block party startup kit. So the idea would be that the city would facilitate some materials to help neighborhoods basically throw their own little parties, again, while respecting social distancing. And that might be another way to entice a variety of different small scale events throughout the city. Lastly is a traveling stage, where we would create a stage, multiple stages potentially, and we would kind of move them around, similar to the picnic table idea that's already active. And we could invite performances and live music at different locations for people to enjoy, again, with the hope of driving kind of that volume to those commercial nodes of the city. So with that, I think, David, you are going to post a poll. And there it is, and it's already started. So if you could fill out, this is one that you can fill out as many as you want. So if you love all the ideas, select them all. If you like none of them, select none. If there's a couple of them you can select, and please, after you select, make sure you hit submit, and we will see the outcome of that shortly.
Okay, thanks a lot, Phil. We'll be coming back to those questions here shortly. So before I just switch this slide, Mayor Darling, I'm going to put you on the spot. Any of these potential initiatives, you're at council, you saw the initiatives that are going forward. Any of these potential initiatives speak to you or have particular interest to you?
Yeah, thanks, David. Certainly for me, the way I'm thinking about it is how do we encourage people to get back out? We know that we're living in a time where we're not going to be able to do some of the things that we'd have normally done. Traveling, for example, outside of the province to Ontario to see other family members. We know that, supporting local business and having those experiences is critically important. I know Victoria Clark from Discover St. John would talk about all the initiatives around staycationing and rediscovering our city. So, I like I can't get street closures out of my head. I know we're calling it open streets, the pop-up drive-in, some of those things that just get people out of their homes, enjoying their community, enjoying the beauty in the community, that anything that can help some of the small, medium-sized enterprises around, restaurants and some of those groups that I've been talking with, help people feel comfortable to partake in some of that if they can. We know that's a whole other discussion about more vulnerable folks and some of those challenges. And I know we had on our earlier call today, I just want to say to all of our participants, it's critically important that these are inclusive ideas as well, that folks have an opportunity to participate at no cost so that they are part of these experiences that happen. So I'm interested to see what folks choose here in terms of their favorites, and I'm hoping we can actually improve this list tonight with a few other ideas. And I know Phil doesn't want to hear that, but I'm hoping to improve that list.
Okay, thank you. Phil, I want to go back to you just for a second. We had a question that came in. It was related to grants. And the question is, if there's a heritage home that's not in the Uptown Peninsula, do they qualify for a grant? Short answer.
The Heritage Grant does support the Heritage District, and there are some variety of Heritage Districts in the city. So it depends if that home is in the Heritage District. It's a common discussion point. There are some beautiful homes that fall outside of the Heritage Zone, and sometimes folks are seeking permission to be included within it. So I think the easiest way is to simply call up our Heritage Officer and say, am I eligible for the grant? And that would be easy. I think it's a great program, and as a heritage homeowner, I know that it does feel, at least from my end, that it costs a little bit more to fix up your house sometimes than the non-heritage homeowner, and maybe it's just because it feels like it falls apart a little bit quicker than others.
Thanks, Phil. And just I want to follow up with you, Mayor Darling. This is sort of a question that we've heard frequently from the public, and I know obviously money's tight at City Hall. Is anything on the radar, either short-term, long-term, for expanding grants to other parts of the city? Is that something that you see happening in short-term, long-term?
Yeah. And look, I don't believe so in the short term, David, but I mean, that's what the broader conversation is all about. I mean, I think we had quite a bit of momentum coming in pre-COVID. I mean, I think we really started locking down on March the 18th, and I don't know how our participants feel, but March the 18th feels like it was 3 years ago to me. So, we have in and around $166 million. And what I'm interested in, certainly have spent the last 4 years of my life talking about, is how do we invest those $166 million differently? And we need many more events like this, and we need engaged citizens to step up. I know I have the list in front of me of all of the participants tonight, and there's many, many people on this list that are envisioning and talking about a different community, a thriving community. So David, I guess my answer would be, we have $166 million. So how do we want to position the city and the region to thrive economically, socially, and culturally? And I won't show you all my mason jars, but I have all my mason jars like Grandma used to do, with loonies in them representing our budget. And I would invite anybody to come in, physically distance, and let's have a conversation about how we want to spend our money differently, for more equality, for more fairness. I'm looking forward to reshaping the city moving forward.
It's a fantastic illustration that you have. So we have all the poll results, and I'm just going to put those live now. So you should all see these on the right-hand side of your screen. So kind of a mixed bag, actually. We're seeing, 52% seems to really like the idea of a pop-up drive-in theater. So 48% unlocking some of those catalytic growth projects that we heard about. And there's a couple questions that we're going to follow up on a little bit later on that as well. So Phil, what are your thoughts on what you're seeing here?
Looks like a lot more work for you and I, David. But no, I think this is great. I think there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm for a lot of these ideas. One point that I will make, and we can kind of talk about it through the Q&A and among others, and you can submit your feedback, is one thing is about driving people to parks. So great idea. I love the idea of people using our parks more. I'm sure everybody loves that idea. But how does that translate back to the small and medium-sized businesses? So I think we still have some connection to do, right? We could have a whole bunch of people going to parks, but then nobody is really benefiting. We need these linkages. The idea with a lot of the ideas we have is that you would have an event at a park, but you at the same time try to encourage people to go get your takeout meal and then go to the park? Or how do you facilitate those? Because some of these might just be self-sufficient, good things in themselves. Don't get me wrong. I want to go to a drive-in theater or at a big parking lot and enjoy it in an urban space. However, I also want to support our local businesses that are struggling. So something to think about as we navigate through these ideas. What's that added filter to help that facilitation?
So I'd like us to move us along, or sort of circle back, as it were. So we had all of the participants answer sort of that question earlier. How do we drive traffic to our commercial districts? And now you've seen some of these initiatives that we have, but we got a lot of great comments, and I'd like to go through some of those now. And if it's okay with folks, I'd like to put you on the spot a little bit. I just want to remind those of you, particularly if you came in late, about raising your hand. If you have comments that you'd like to speak to, again, select that participant button. You'll see your name on the side of the screen. You just click the little hand to raise your hand. And then you put your hand down when you don't have anything to say. If you're dialing in, it's just *3. So let's circle back. Don Hemmings had a really great comment. And Don, I'm going to put you on the spot. Again, if people don't want to speak, don't speak, and I'll move on to the next person. But Don, you had a great comment here about 2 comments, actually: eliminating parking costs for 12 months, but then also providing free high-speed internet. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate on those ideas, and I've put you live.
Are you there, Don?
I'm trying to unmute.
We got you.
We can hear you.
We got you.
Oh, okay. I'm just watching so carefully this work at home and the comfort level that everybody has working at home, and finding places, I guess, just day-to-day collaborating with business prospects, your friends, family, and almost everything relies on your smartphone, which I consider to be my brain extender. So anywhere in all these discussions that makes it so easy to relocate. Maybe it could be 4 places in the day and close to vendors, as long as there's internet and mobility is affordable, since communications and mobility are key parts outside of food. I think those first 2 things would really help drive projects.
And Don, anything comments on your parking comment? So you had a comment that you think maybe we could eliminate parking costs for 12 months. What are your thoughts there?
Just about everybody is working at or trying to understand what zero-based budgeting is, and eliminating everything in their life that's not needed, assuming we're starting from 0, and taxing people to visit the hub is not exactly moving in the right direction. So you're talking about visitors. You're not talking about people that live there. We need huge numbers to support the amazing businesses that are in the core. And we'll probably have to walk further than we ever did to get to those. So paying, to me, makes no sense.
Okay, thanks for your comments, Don. Your Worship, why don't I turn that over to you first?
Yeah. So thanks, Don. Nice to hear from you. Thanks for participating. Very quickly, we've already been having a conversation in a couple of other circles, and actually it was fueled out of some of the education challenges with schools closing and some folks having access to hardware and to internet, Wi-Fi. So there's a bit of a conversation already happening there. As you already know, I suspect we have a bit of a Wi-Fi infrastructure in the uptown that was driven, by some tourism support a number of years ago. There was a project that got defunded, to expand some of that network. So that is back on the table. In fact, I received an email from staff yesterday with a reminder as to, that project. And there's a group talking about how could we expand that, and we'd have to build on that idea. And on the parking, great minds think alike. That came up this morning on our business group as well. And it was more around retail, Don. And I think that's sort of your point as well. Is in fact, a couple of retailers said they are in fact already do it. If you make a purchase, here's your toonie, to pay you back for your parking you just paid. So that's something we're going to have to take away. And your comment on zero-based budgeting is that's the reality that we face. And this is a my opinion comment, not a council endorsed comment, is that we've got to recognize the reality that we face moving forward. Number one. Number two, we can't just say no all the time, because yes, there's a revenue impact to maybe having free parking, but we have to somehow build that case to say, even if it's in the short term for the next 2 or 3 months, to try to stimulate and support those small business owners, parking's on us or something. So we'll take both of those ideas away, Don, and certainly look into them.
Phil, anything you want to add?
A great discussion between the Dons there. I think the high-speed internet idea is great, and I think for everybody on the line, I think it's important to note that, listen, a lot of these initiatives are about immediate injection of community and economic development. That's what the current need is. But there's inevitably going to be some projects that we need to envision today for tomorrow. And when I mean tomorrow, it might be 3 months from now. It might be 6 months from now. So, the great example is, like, at some point, we're going to be able to have a concert of 500 people. So do we need to wait until we know we're allowed to have a concert of 500 people to start talking about it? Or should we start talking about it now? What does that concert look like now? So that we don't have to be 2 months late at the game when we want to be the first city to launch the first 500 person concert. And, Don's comments about high-speed internet is one that I think is a longer term discussion. I'm not trying to dissuade the importance of it today, but our infrastructure and our connectivity is very important, not just for immediate users, but for the attraction of investment, for our education system, for businesses that are in place. And it's a huge opportunity, and that has to compete with our other infrastructure costs. So, to me, that is something that I really like, that people can think about what is their future recovery initiatives. And that $550,000 that the mayor said, although, I suspect some people in the community would like to spend that today, I've been saying we need to stretch that out as much as possible, likely into 2021, to show the value of this transition to a full post-pandemic world that we need to prepare ourselves for.
Thanks a lot, Phil. And thanks, Don, for your comments. Just as an FYI, because I'm seeing some other comments about this as well, and some wireless zones in Fredericton and other cities, the city does have free public Wi-Fi, for those who aren't aware, in a lot of our public buildings and in some fairly sizable swaths of Uptown. And certainly we've heard some calls for expanding that before. It's certainly something that we're listening to as well. So I want to move on to another comment that we heard. So Dahlia Doss has a couple comments here, but Dahlia, I want to put you on the spot. You had some comments about reassuring folks that businesses are opening safely. And so I just wonder if you wouldn't mind commenting on that, and maybe what you think the city can do to help with that messaging.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think these are great ideas, and we're starting to have the conversation now, which is great. But I still feel like if you're talking about immediate injection of population into the city's core, then some people are still a little bit on the fence, especially those that have elderly in their families or young kids. They're being more cautious, and rightfully so. So I feel like there's a real need to reassure people that they will continue to be safe, that they can come and still enjoy a few things without having to compromise on their health and safety. And the better we can do that up front, I think that the more we will be able to mobilize people to come out and try out some of this new stuff we're offering.
And so let me throw this back to you, Dali. What specific messaging do you think the city can offer? I know this is traditionally the jurisdiction of the province, who's usually, we're following the province's mandatory order. But what role do you think the city or the municipality can play in getting those messages across?
I think we can take measures to ensure we're following the province's protocols in our events. For example, if we're doing say a live music event, and we can have marked out spots for people to space out their lawn chairs or something like that, and just have some volunteers ensure that people are maintaining that level of social distancing. Just give them a gentle reminder, because some people are put off by the fact that just even if it takes only a couple of people to not follow the rules for so many other people to get infected, right? So if we can just ensure that there's some volunteers in place helping people to space themselves out and sort of keeping people on track, then that will be a reassurance for sure. And proper signage. I know we've been discussing signage for a bit of time here, but having it really well displayed and setting expectations up front. So if we're creating a Facebook event, for example, we can really line out what measures we're expecting the people to adhere to once they're attending the event. I know that event in Sussex that's happening tomorrow, they have been really clear on how they want their attendees to behave. Don't get out of your car, stay in there and enjoy the event from within your car. So something like that to make sure they know what to expect.
Okay, great comment, Dahlia. Thank you. Phil, obviously this is something that a lot of people are concerned about. Dahlia, I don't think, is alone in this. What's the city doing with regards to this, and how is that entering into our discussions on some of these potential initiatives and the initiatives we're already going forward with?
A great point, Delia. Thank you so much for the feedback and the question. I think we've all I've called it kind of COVID proofing my house, COVID proofing my office, COVID proofing some processes. We've all been involved in that. I'm surely in different ways, from just going to the grocery store to whatever. And the city is doing that as well. So you see that happening across. For those who attended recently the Queen Square Market, it's a brand new market than it was before. That's in the Uptown. The Thursday night market will be very different. And I think one of the things that businesses are really becoming or demonstrating their strength in is that they're learning as well. They're opening up their businesses. They're becoming very efficient, very effective at demonstrating the level of seriousness that they're taking it. And those that take it seriously, I suspect, get that valued customer response in return. And the customers want to return. So I think this is something the city has to uphold in the projects it funds, the activities that happen on its properties, in its facilities, and to give that level of comfort for those participants, so that they could come back again and say, I really enjoyed that, and I felt safe, and I felt like it was the appropriate amount. So, everything that we do has to be, COVID proofed as much as possible to create that environment for comfort and get people feeling like they can enjoy the spaces that they once enjoyed in a different way prior to COVID-19.
Thanks, Phil. Mayor Darling, any comments you'd like to offer there?
Yeah, no, I think, and Dahlia, I've appreciated your comments of, we follow each other on Facebook, and I know this has been something you've been concerned all the way through. So I think, for me, it's that feedback channel. And again, the businesses themselves have to have that channel open. Let's just acknowledge for a moment, at least for myself, I was quite surprised. I'm going back now 6-7 weeks perhaps ago, but what I felt like going to the grocery store, it was a new experience. At one point, actually, my wife Patty said courageously to someone, "You're coming down the wrong way. This is a one-way lane. Please turn around." Those are not conversations we had before. So what role does the municipality have, but also, the actual vendors and businesses and have to be in communication with their customers to make them as comfortable as possible. And then it's a little bit, I'm not making light of it, Dahlia and everyone else, but I don't remember where I saw it in the last week, but it was a gathering, and to have a little bit of fun with it, somebody made a safety kit, and it was pool noodles that an individual was walking around in the crowd and just saying, follow the rules, physically distance, but they made a bit of fun with it by having an outfit that had pool noodles going off in every direction. So, I guess, Phil, on a serious note, when we have these events, what role are we going to play with the person with the orange vest on going around with the whistle, being serious, but also having a bit of fun, just to remind us that, we can't hug each other anymore. We can't give the handshakes and all the greetings that we normally did. So I do appreciate those comments, Dahlia.
David, you might want to be the pool noodle guy for the next one.
I'm totally in the pool noodle guy. Yep.
Okay, we're going to move on really shortly to the next section of our presentation, but there's a great comment here that we have from Nick Cameron about active transportation. I think it's a good segue into our next section. So Nick's proposing we can drive some traffic to our commercial districts through active transportation. I think Nick also had a question about our Ashburn Lake interchange. So Nick, I wonder if you could comment on your questions here, or your comments.
Sure, can you hear me fine?
We can, yes.
All right. Yeah. So this has been a really great discussion since the survey went out. It got people talking about what exactly a street closure means, or the different options, and that's just been some of the feedback I've observed so far. Is closure does sound scary and a bit intimidating, but I think we are lucky in the Uptown that most of our streets are pretty pedestrian friendly. On a couple of blocks of Germain and Prince William, we have some bump outs, and that's great. So that's good to see. But I think the larger challenge is connectivity from the North End or Milledgeville, the West Side, the East Side. I think the East Side is a huge challenge. It's very dense, chopped up property ownership. So getting an active transportation corridor that is a bit tricky on the East Side. But I think on the West Side and North, we have the advantage of the Campus Harbor connection and Harbor Passage. I think they started it. But there's still some work to do to provide greater connectivity throughout the broader city. That we have some opportunities that are shovel ready. I was talking to our MP Wayne Long this morning. There's some potential funding there that he's really excited about. It was a really great positive meeting. Had a great meeting earlier this week with some infrastructure people at the City of St. John earlier this week, which was also very positive. So I'd love to follow up a bit more with the community development and growth side to see how we can get some of this stuff rolling. But yeah, starting to think a little bit more about a network and what is some of the low, which is going to be a long-term goal. But I think there are some low-hanging fruit that we can get started on right away, like City Road, to connect us to the pedestrian overpass over to Rockwood Park and that neighborhood there in Mount Pleasant, and like Chesley Drive to get us closer to the West Side. Those are roads that have already been studied for a road diet, and I think now is a great opportunity to act on those.
Okay, thanks, Nick, for your comments. Mayor Darling, any comments there?
Yeah, first want to thank Nick for his leadership. I mean, he's got lots of jobs, but he's very passionate. He did meet with Commissioner McGovern this past week, or this week, I think, and I saw the report. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be there with you, Nick. Very big supporter. I want to land. We just need to take on a couple of projects, and especially with some of the infrastructure dollars that are available, in some cases 80 cent dollars from the federal government around active transportation, and we need to measure quality of life differently in this city, and we need to tackle some of these projects, and we need to find a way to make sure everyone is inclusive. Our seniors, the youngest residents, those that enjoy active transportation, and there's so many roadways that we can put on a diet in this city, Nick. So thanks for your leadership, and let's keep the pedals moving forward on these projects so that we can land a few.
Okay, so Phil's gonna have the floor here now. This is a nice segue into our open street survey. And Phil, I know there'll be some chance for you to talk about active transportation, but over to you for this next part.
Great, thank you. So we went with the term open streets, and it was kind of commented earlier, and that was intentional. I do think that when you think about, street closure, it's restrictive. You might think of it as a construction site. And there's a lot more going on in open streets than just a street closure. And we want to invite people to start thinking about that, thinking about it on what is already happening, what else can happen on streets. And, we used other terms like how do we animate the street? How do we identify alternative uses of the street temporarily? So we put out this survey, and David, you can go to the next slide. A whole bunch of people participated in it. We had over 2,000 responses. One thing that I've mentioned before to others is if anybody's filled out a survey, there's this kind of last question of the survey. And the question is like, if you have any other feedback or ideas, please submit here. And literally for people who have worked with surveys, like 1% of the population will submit extra ideas. I suspect many of you on this call are people that would submit those ideas because you're participating in a virtual town hall. However, we received 500 different ideas as a result of that. So, you have a quarter of the people that did participate in this survey say, I have more to offer. And I think that's really indicative that this open street concept is striking an important discussion point in our community. Nick, you mentioned it. It's part of active transportation. It's part of play streets, which I'll get to. It's part of business recovery. It's part of cultural celebration. It's part of recovering from COVID-19. And it's also on the negative side. I'm not just going to make the rose-colored glasses comments here. Some people are afraid. What does this mean for my business? What if I live in one of these streets? I can't go park there. I'm going to have to stay there overnight. What happens if I have to leave? 90% of my business is people dropping in and picking up orders and leaving. So if my street's closed, are they still going to do that? So don't get me wrong, open streets is not just a positive thing, and it requires us to get this evidence, which is exactly why we did this survey, and which is exactly why we're following up with these virtual town halls. So 82% of the folks who did respond were from St. John, 18% were from outside, which is great. People from the Valley are seeing St. John as part of their own and wanting to participate in that. That's great. First question we asked to residents, because there was a resident stream and a business stream, was on what type of street closure you like the most. And it's basically a sliding scale from the most open to the least open. So, street openings all summer, weekend street openings, evening street openings, and then street openings for the full day. So quite a bit of interest there for almost all of them. We're starting to get into some pretty interesting findings on street closure. So one was that 85% of those surveys were more inclined to visit a restaurant or store if it had outdoor space. And, we're reading into that as saying, people still want to interact with their local economy, with their businesses that they like, but they might be a little timid about interacting in a way that they used to. And that open space is something that gives them that opportunity to interact, and maybe a safer space from what they consider. So just think of that in terms of what's the city's role. So if space is the issue, that's where streets come in. That's where extended sidewalks come in. So this is that speaks to what can the city do about this. Next slide. We also, this was quite surprising. We hear a lot of folks when we close down streets that, in businesses that if you close down a street, business is not necessarily going to get to that location, which is the case. But in this stat here, you see that folks are comfortable right up to kind of, 10-minute walk from the location that they're attending, even at the 10 to 15 minutes, they're 25% likely to still walk in that distance to get to their destination. Next slide. We put together, this is 200 to 300 meters. So this is not a 10-minute walk. This is a 200 to 300 meter walk. So what's that? That's probably a 3 to 5 minute walk, 200 to 300 meters, maybe. I'm not sure, but that's the kind of the localized restaurant district of the uptown. That's how far people would walk, and 85% of respondents said they were willing to walk that distance. So you could just imagine what 10 minutes would look like. Basically, walking from the north end is the level of comfort that folks would have. Next slide. Okay, play streets. This is a concept that some of you may have less familiarity with, but in larger cities, what's happened is when parks have closed, there's a hugely dense population, and there's kids and families that want to interact with those streets. So for the most part, play streets in the COVID-19 world, the popular mechanism is for these young families and kids to reclaim the street and make it their own. So for people that remember kind of playing ball hockey on the street, that's kind of the environment that's thought. However, it can be a lot of things. It can also be, yoga classes. It could also be a Zumba class. It could be a stretching class. It could be Tai Chi. It could be a whole bunch of different things that are done on what is traditionally a right-of-way for vehicles, translated into a play area for people to interact. Again, while respecting social distancing and the mandatory orders. So on that stat, over 50% of respondents were very much interested. There was a kind of a sizable portion that had an either favor or unfavorable, but I think that's a pretty interesting stat that people would use it for that. And that's a way to animate it, animate the street once it is closed. Okay, next slide. So we did connect with businesses, and we discovered that about 83 businesses participated, and the overwhelming majority of them were from the Central Peninsula. The breakdown was, pretty diverse. Restaurants had a large portion, as well as retail and the professional services, transportation, culture, and entertainment, among others. So this is a great stat. Everything in red is approval. Everything in that teal color is, not supportive of street closures of open streets in some regards. So 60% are extremely or very supportive of open streets. And, with that, I think that combined with the resident feedback would suggest that, from a city staff perspective, from a council perspective, that we are ready to proceed with a city initiated street closure program for the city, where I don't know yet when and how and who's impacted, all things to come, but we did commit that we would provide a recommendation by June 22nd. So I think this survey provides a pretty strong evidence that we should proceed. We are cautious. We definitely want to hear continuously how we can mitigate those that are opposed, that teal color, if you may, and those on the line that might have some concerns with it. But and I should remind people that we will start small on this and expand as we see it fit, and adapt as we see it fit as well. So I see this as what is implementable kind of in the very near future, and is the program expandable, and how so to do it. Also, likely there is a focus of interest in the Central Peninsula. There's a lot of interest there, and there's kind of familiarity. I think the other side of it is, how does this get implemented in places like Lancaster, Rossay Avenue, Fairville Boulevard, Lower West Side, the North End, all streets that have these commercial nodes as well, and maybe not as intuitive on how we would proceed with an open streets concept there. However, it doesn't mean that it's not important. So I'd pitch that as well, and on what exactly that future looks like for those other areas as well.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Phil. It was a great presentation. Mary Darling, what are your thoughts, initial thoughts on open streets or play streets?
Yeah, I love the idea. I think what you've done with the survey, working with stakeholders, business owners, is you've now been able to sort of zero in and bring some data and some facts to the conversation. So I'd say, Phil, when, where, let's try it, and again, will it be perfect? No, it won't, but let's try some things. My idea, as I shared this morning, was probably more some trials. Could we do a Friday night? Could we do a Saturday? Could we do a Saturday night? Family oriented, maybe more mature oriented, make sure it's inclusive, and let's try a few. get that feedback. And I may have missed, Phil, I'm sorry, in your presentation, but I know this morning you mentioned, just for clarity, that with open streets, we still have, because I know some of the business owners this morning were concerned about the deliveries of goods to their buildings and their offices, or their that there still would be a plan for some movement of vehicles. It doesn't necessarily mean closing the street off altogether. It might mean having more the percentages of use available would change. The sidewalk might be a bit bigger, but cars could still move, and obviously doing all of that safely. So I'm excited to try something, David, back to your question. I'm excited to try it. We should try something sooner rather than later, and see how it went. We've done it in the past. We know it's been successful. So let's try and see if we can, meet the majority of our objectives.
Okay. And Phil, how soon can we expect to see some of these changes that the mayor's looking for?
Maybe two different answers. One is city initiated street closures, and then community initiated street closures. So the community initiated street closures, there's already kind of multiple in the air right now, and I suspect you're going to be hearing about some of those closures occurring soon. So that is businesses, community groups initiating the closure and city approving it. And it would be it could be patios, it could be a whole bunch of things. So that is coming forward, and you will hear that. For the city one, there will be a recommendation on the 22nd, no matter what. So you're going to get that, and I'd like to see that transition into reality very shortly. The other piece is, as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to close down streets, but I'd also like to give the businesses and the community the time to think about how they would animate it. So, for example, if I say, okay, we're going to close down this section of Germain Street, as an example, I'd like the businesses in Germain Street to have enough lead time to say, oh, thank you. How long is it going to take? It's going to be next weekend. So they have a week to think about how are they going to adapt their business within a week in order to invite a little bit of their business out on that right of way and utilize and benefit from that constructively. So I wouldn't want it to be immediate. I wouldn't want it to be the next day per se, but I also want to give some lead time to those businesses and to the community to realize what's happening and to try to make it something that it will just drive volume. It won't just be a street closure. It will be more than a street closure. It will be an event. It will be an experience for both businesses and residents that they'll want to do again, because part of what we're going to do here is likely to test it out over time. So we can get people doing one and then say, oh, the next one will be that much more popular, and we'll learn from our mistakes, but we'll get even better at it.
Okay, thanks, Phil. So this is a question that we have for all of you tuning in tonight. So based on what you've heard, what streets in St. John do you think are ideal candidates for open streets? What are ideal candidates for play streets? And so we'd like you to type your answers into the Q&A, or you can use the chat function as well. My challenge to you is, we have a pretty good sense of the streets uptown that people think are, the ones that we would typically look at for open streets. Those are the same ones that are used for festivals, Moonlight Bazaar, Canterbury, the Grand Lanes, the Germains, the Prince Williams. What about the rest of the city? What are some ideal candidates in other parts of St. John, whether for, active transportation links, open streets, play streets? So please type those answers in. While you're doing that, I want to go back to some comments that we heard. Brian Wilson has had just a ton of great comments throughout the evening. Brian, I want to put you on the spot for a minute. You had a comment about us, maybe utilizing alternate side street parking for slow streets. And I'm wondering if you want to talk about that, or some of your other comments that you had about better utilizing public space. So, Brian, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, and it only came up because city manager mentioned it last night. But wondering, often I find that the city staff and those who do traffic, they have the expertise, but the idea had come in my head that if citizens very quickly were able to adapt to moving their cars back and forth to each side of the street, then what other kind of adaptation can they do or be willing to do if perhaps they're interested in having their street be a play street or a slow street? I don't know. I think some of the expertise for the traffic personnel might be able to answer that one better, but I thought it might be an idea.
Okay, and let me put you on the spot here for a moment, Brian. Any particular streets in the city that you think would be ideal candidates for some of these options?
I had just finished popping it in there. I think Ludlow Street would be a great one to work with,
Okay.
particularly because it is frequently used as a shortcut for people who really don't care about speed limits. And there's another number of collector roads around the neighborhood down at Marketplace, Duke Street, St. John, and Lancaster City Line that already service the area. So you wouldn't be impacting the overall traffic for the neighborhood. The Ludlow Street itself is a main corridor for the Family Ties Play Care as they move about the neighborhood. They use that as their pedestrian arterial route. And it's already a pedestrian arterial route for everyone in the neighborhood who's going over to the Carlton Community Commercial Center, which has got the Tim Hortons, the Frenchies, the Snack Shack, and a couple other shops, I believe. I think huge potential, and maybe it could be phased in. It might start off with maybe the first block of it being contingent as a block party, and if the public says, "Hey, we like that," there might be maybe a rider on that says that it could continue. And I'd be willing to shop around milk and cookies and talk to people first before we even put that into place.
Okay, great comments. Thanks, Brian. Mary Darling.
No, I love it. Thanks, Brian. I mean, I know Brian, he's very, very thoughtful. He's an innovative idea generator. He just, and he brings a perspective of coming from another place, which is good too, because to dream, sometimes we have beautiful sunsets, but sometimes if you see a sunset away, so I love the idea. I think it's for us, Phil, again, and David, to take that away and say, it really fits into my earlier comments about, what we're talking about here today, but even more so, Brian, to how do we make St. John more livable, more equitable, more livable, neighborhoods within neighborhoods, and certainly all the streets that you mentioned. I mean, and I love the milk and cookies and, bringing people together, perhaps soon for the good old fashioned town halls, right? Where we're sitting around innovating and and it's not my expertise either, Brian, but getting some folks together to say, well, how could we make this 4 or 5 block radius, the best 4 or 5 blocks to live in the whole city, recognizing, it doesn't always have to be really expensive to make some of those enhancements as well. So I like it. I think we can do better. And as you referenced in your comments, we are revisiting some of the, parking regulations in a most recent bylaw change because citizens reached out and said, look, we want that to be revisited. So I love the comments. And I guess, Phil, to you, we have to, not for tonight, we won't figure it all out, but we have to figure out how can we have these types of engagements so that we design the city of the future, which is thriving economically, socially, and culturally.
Okay, Jeff White, you had some great comments even before we started talking about open streets, about pedestrian streets. You've had some additional comments on slow streets. I'm wondering if you could share some of your ideas with us and maybe elaborate a little bit on some of your feedback. Jeff, do we have you on the line?
Maybe gone.
Okay, so that wasn't working there. So we're seeing a couple different options here for streets. Charlotte Street, Duke Street West, Mount Pleasant Avenue North, I think was one that we saw, Manawaganish Road. Phil, what are your thoughts on some of those streets that you're seeing outside of the urban core?
Yeah, I'm kind of stuck on the last conversation we had, but it kind of structures this too. I live on a dead end street with 4 other houses, and sometimes it is default. If anybody who's ever lived on a dead end street, it turns into a default kind of, if there's kids in the area, the kind of kids play in section. So there's a basketball net or whatever else, and basically what happens is, the different neighbors come together and say, hey, we're going to play ball hockey. You cool with that? And it happens, right? And everybody's kind of comfortable with it. But I guess I wonder, I'm kind of just thinking out loud here about, maybe neighborhoods have to think about that in a new way. If we're talking about, porch parties or, block party toolkits, if they're going to go around and kind of plan that out, well, maybe they have to think about it in a new way too. So when you're looking at these street closures and it's not, Germain Street or Main Street or Rosse Avenue, but it's kind of getting into some of those residential nodes of the city, it really strikes me that the heavy-handed city of St. John saying, we're closing down this street in your neighborhood because we think it's important to you, I think is likely not the right answer. It's likely the other way around, where the residents come together and say, we want to claim this street for our Saturdays. And city, help us make it happen. Show us how to make this work. And it's part of our recovery, and we have a plan for this. And I think if you do that, I think the city will support in whatever way it's possible, but that might be the type of street closure that might work at the neighborhood level, at that residential level. And I'm just kind of thinking about, I'm not trying to pass the buck either to residents. The city has a role, and we will do city-initiated street closures, but at the residential level, it's likely not best coming from the city, because we're kind of dictating to neighbors how they should manage their street, right?
Yeah. Now, one of the comments you made earlier, Phil, about play streets and sort of the opportunity for play streets is that it gives kids and residents in neighborhoods that aren't near parks access to some recreation in a place that might not typically invite that. But we've seen some feedback from the public that, they think that maybe we should be promoting our parks a little bit more than we are. I see some of the comments. Manjeet Tour has some comments about how we can better use our parks. Manjeet, I'm wondering if you might comment a little bit on parks, and maybe how can we tie in using parks and green spaces with economic recovery?
Hello, David. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Perfect. And thank you very much for putting this event on. Thank you, David and Phil and Mayor Don. My statement on the parks, really, I've asked two questions, or I've made two statements in total. We did open the Heritage Grants, and my comment on that would be, why don't, instead of funneling our funding through to that program, why don't we open more parks so that we can actually promote the use of parks, especially for priority neighborhoods and lower income neighborhoods. And also, maybe this is one way where we can promote the usage of parks for events. For example, Multicultural Day is coming up. Why don't we, channel our funds through opening parks so that organizations like nonprofit organizations can use those parks for their events?
Okay, wonderful, great comments. Mayor Darling, I'm going to turn that one over to you first.
Yes, sure. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the comments. I guess my comment is, and I know we've been having a lot of conversation about dollars and cents and restructuring prior to COVID-19, and those continue. And it has perhaps pitted a lot of, either this one or that one. But in fact, my answer is I think we need both. We have some of the best accumulation of and most significant accumulation of heritage buildings in the country. That program, the return on the investment on that program is exceptional. We put it aside for a bit, and we've brought it back now that we have a better sense of how we're dealing with COVID-19, and we need to have our parks open, and we've gone through a whole rationalization of how many parks we have. I know the city at one point, you see it in the size, the roadways, I think was designed for a couple of 100,000 people, and we're not a couple of 100,000 people. We're somewhere between 68 and 69,000 at this stage. So we've been trying to through our Play SJ, which is our strategic plan around parks, and have perhaps fewer parks, but better parks, so that we can take the dollars we have and invest those in those parks. So I think we in this period that we're in right now, we are bringing more and more parks back on stream, and opening those parks. And again, I would just end with, and thank you again with your comments, is and it's really to you, Phil, and David, and myself, I suppose, and council. How do we continue these conversations to really understand what people value and you know, recreation, arts, culture? You know, I know Debbie McCormick is, I think, still on the line. Debbie and I have had many conversations about subsidization and how we so easily subsidize one group and we don't subsidize other groups at all. And I wish that those were simple and black and white, but right now we lack the criteria so that we can say we're using, you know, really good decision making and criteria and data that says if we invest in arts and culture and our seniors and recreation and inclusivity and all those things, we are going to grow. So some short term there perhaps and some longer term, and I think park space is critically important to folks. So anyway, I'm not sure. It's been a bit of a long day. I'm not sure if any of that made any sense.
Yeah, no,
I just
great comment.
a few thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, great comment, Mary Darling. One of the things that we've observed in sort of in the growth department is just how valuable green space is in making a community an attractive place to live. And when we surveyed our newcomer community earlier this year, that was by far the single most important, you know, city asset is our green spaces. So it's certainly something that's high on our radar. And I think even those of us who've been living in St. John a while, maybe we sometimes take for granted how much green space that we actually have, how many recreation assets we have. I think part of the challenge is the city is just so darn big that there's not a lot of clustering. And so I think this conversation that we're having tonight about creating better corridors for active transportation to connect some of those centers, I think will go a long way. I want to switch gears just slightly here. Paula Burke has a question about, are those with mobility issues going to be considered? I know that's the question we asked in the survey. Paula, I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit on your question.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, I didn't know if I was live or not.
You're live.
I find that even walking around uptown the way it is now, very difficult. So I don't usually go there because of all the hills. And now you're going to close some of the streets, which I think is a great idea, by the way. It's going to make things work easier, I think. But those of us who have mobility issues might not be able to participate.
Okay, great comment. Phil, why don't I turn that one over to you first?
Yeah, it's a great comment, and it's a great consideration to think about when any programming is invited onto our streets. You know, we do. There's a whole kind of traffic engineering side of our business that thinks about sidewalks and how are sidewalks mobility friendly and how they are. But streets are not made for pedestrians always. Streets are made for vehicles, and that's a really important piece. Those are considerations to think about access and moving in and off of the pedestrian right of way on the sidewalk is something that is something to consider. But listen, I think that's something that we need to always do better on and think about in new ways on our streets, in our parks, on our sidewalks, on our existing sidewalks. But absolutely, any programming that we would invite should enable that. I also think that you know, when I think of a closed street and I think about mobility issues, I also just think of when it's so busy. You know, and I've seen Moonlight Bazaar or Third Shift. There's thousands of people in a very small space, and that brings a new challenge in terms of just navigating it. And if you have mobility issues, it's not just that you're navigating the kind of physical infrastructure, you're also navigating the crowds. And that's something that will not happen, that cannot happen with street closures. We will not be able to invite 1,000 people to a site without disbanding it. And that's not the intention. So in one way, this might be an ideal time to see if we can do this for mobility purposes to make this right and to create plans to make sure that people feel invited with all different types of mobility needs that are out there. So thank you for the comment.
Okay, and Mayor Darling, over to you. Any comments on making sure that any of our initiatives are friendly for those who might have mobility challenges?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Paula, thank you for participating. Thank you for the question. We have an ability advisory committee in the city. and they're always looking at these types of issues with us. And like many topics in the world today, can we do better? Absolutely. Do we need to do better? Absolutely. Do we need to do a better job of making sure we're looking through the lens or of all users? Absolutely. So thank you for your comment. We can work with our staff on safeguarding for all participants, and we will take that issue away. And I know we've got a very active ability advisory committee that is always looking at all aspects of everything from day to day to special events to help us make sure we're inclusive. So we will take that away as homework. Thank you.
Okay. So we are coming to the end of our virtual town hall, and we couldn't get to every single question. Again, thank you to all of the participants tonight for submitting your questions. We have all of them now. We want you to continue to send your feedback to us, feedback@stjohn.ca. We're just going to do one quick, more fun poll at the end here. St. John is a city of firsts. And so we'd like you to tell us which one of these you think is not true about St. John. And so as you're doing that, I want to turn things over to Mayor Darling, just for final words. Your Worship, what do we need to do as a community, in summary, to recover? Is it going to happen organically? Is it going to happen by coordinated effort, a mixture of the two? Last word to you.
Thanks very much again. Thanks everyone for participating. I don't think it happens organically. I think it happens with a plan and with an action-oriented plan to be as inclusive as possible, to work with all levels of government, to work with local champions, citizens, private sector, businesses of all sizes, the Chamber of Commerce, Uptown St. John, all of the economic development agencies. We've seen amazing stories of resiliency in the last number of months, and recognizing that we're all feeling a bit of angst, but never forgetting that, as we're answering your poll question, David, never forgetting that this is a kind and generous community. I'm very optimistic about the future. We're full of potential, and we're kind and generous, and everywhere I look, not right now because it's foggy out my window, but oceans, rivers, parks, I think we have to recognize that the world has changed, in my view, forever, and if we have these really important conversations, we keep engaging like this. So thank you to you and Phil and everyone else involved. We keep engaging like this, we will shape a greater city for the future, because we're all in this together. So thanks for the opportunity, and thank you to everybody who participated tonight.
Okay, so just we have the results in. So people are split.
A tie.
It's a tie. So there was a number of different opinions this morning as well. We've got corrected a little bit by the chamber. So St. John, all these things are true, except for we didn't have the first newspaper in Canada. Apparently we were beaten by Halifax, which I guess we can give them something. But apparently David Duplessis from the chamber emailed us later with an actual picture of the very first penny newspaper in the whole British Empire, which was started in St. John. So I think we have a bit of a claim to fame. Thanks very much again, everybody, for your participation tonight. Again, if you have feedback, please send it in, feedback@stjohn.ca. We'll have a little 30-second survey when you get off the call here tonight. And again, our line is always open. We welcome your feedback and your comments. And thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to engage with the city tonight. And we really appreciate all your feedback and your participation. So have a great night. Stay safe. And
see everyone. Thank you.
Later.